I would like to say that the major issues that I see personally with this is one of timing. Oh my god. What's up guys, Jimmy here. We have a bit of a video to go through today. I wanted to make sure I got this put out. I think I've been telling people that I would put a video out about this, and it has been a few days since this was posted and we've had some time to mull it over. I think without further ado, we can get into the video. So to give some context around this for people who may not have had an idea of what's going on here, there is a second combat update that just got posted midweek. This is coming basically in mid-February, which is kind of late. This is the second combat update we've received. The first one actually came out on January 9th. And for anyone who's kind of out of the loop here, Brighter Shores is a MMO created by the RuneScape founder Andrew Gower and his brothers Paul, Ian, and they've got a small team. This game just went into early access on November 6th, and there was maybe a 6-month closed beta with only a couple dozen people. But yeah, that's kind of how we've gotten to this point. I will also reference, they've kind of given a few hints at a roadmap. There's been an AMA outside of these few communications and some work from their community moderator, Fen Samuel. We've really seen only a handful of updates. So I will summarize the change. We'll go through there's maybe a dozen points or so. I'll try and make it really simple to understand. Then I'll kind of give my thoughts about the change and how I feel about things, and yeah, the state of the game. So getting into this here, there's really only some major updates at the top here, but the first point is that they are getting rid of obelisk levels. So there's only going to be combat levels, right? That's probably the biggest change, is that in the previous version of the update, you guys can check out my other video if you're way out of tune about well, what's an obelisk level? Luckily you don't have to worry about it because they're not going to be added. They're just going to be combining all 4 combat stats together. So this merged combat stat, that's kind of the second major point here, is that we're going to be able to get 1 combat profession up to level 2000, and it's not going to be associated with any other episode combat levels. So things like guard, minefighter, scout, and watch person are gone. Those were a thing of the past. There might be some legacy content there, but we'll get to that in a second. So they've made progress with this plan. They say, we hope to launch it very soon. This is kind of a big deal. We've seen some words around urgency, and usually they kind of follow up on this, but for them to kind of jump out with this plan and say that they're going to give it to us very soon is kind of surprising, because it's been over a month since the last combat update and we'd heard nothing, and this is significantly different than the previous combat update. It's, yeah, a little bit shocking to see them say that they're going to launch it very soon. We don't know if this means days, weeks, might just mean under 3 months, which is kind of the only timeline that we've really heard about pretty much anything in the game. We're still trying to get a handle on the roadmap, and it seems to be very difficult to do. So the next step here, they talk about this concept called striping. It's a bit confusing, but really they're just trying to take the current investments of time people have done and make sure that they are personalized and understood in the future. The main goal here is that if you've already defeated a number of monsters in a number of episodes, you don't have to fight those same skins again. But to make this really simple, you have something like the 9 skins of, a certain monster in a certain zone. Maybe I think a better example would be the Hopeport Thieves. There's 7 of them. You basically level up and you go through each set of monsters, and then once you fight the highest level one, by that point you've already unlocked the next monster, which is basically a reskin of the first thing you fought, and then the second thing. They change up the order sometimes a little bit, but it's that same idea. So they show this skin 1, skin 1, skin 1, then skin 2, skin 2, skin 2. Basically for each episode there will be a skin 1 foe, which is basically just like the 0 to 30 combat that we're doing for the episodic combat levels, just the same thing. This is really a minimal change overall, but the behind the scenes of how this is working, there's a couple good points that they made that I do want to give them credit for. They said that passive combat foes between the old combat level system of what was in the previous update and, active, were basically split between, you had this episode level that was a obelisk level. So there was some weird cutoff where you'd either get the level for your combat overall, and they felt like they didn't like that. The combat being restarted obviously is only partially true, and only 30 of the levels and 470 of them were still being ignored anyway. And then there's some other parts here about basically the flow of the combat. I think it's gonna be a little bit smoother because it'll at least be linear now, but this kind of goes against the original plan completely of making each episode not competitive. Instead, you have to get all of your combat levels up, but you get to kind of sample each zone zone to get, you know, the skin 1 mobs done immediately. So you're getting the early access, but you're also able to kind of get mastery across all episodes. But the transition, the people who've already done like 500 guard, for example, I won't have to kill any of the monsters in Hopeport because I already have those skins done. So I will be leveling up and getting the remaining levels in other professions, or at least in other episodes where there no longer will be a combat profession. So yeah, as we understand it, this striping system, it's just looking at what we've done, and as we progress naturally, we shouldn't have to refight things that we've already fought. So there's some intelligence that they've put in. There's a few minor points here. Quest bosses will scale to be slightly harder than the easiest foe in that episode. I'm not a huge fan of this at all. I just don't like scaled content. I think it takes away from the achievement and progression nature of most games that I've played. Generally, scaled content never feels like you really accomplished anything, and to me it's just like more of a chore. So I'm not really a huge fan of scaled content. Like even Elvarg, at least you have an idea of like, okay, you had to get to a certain combat level to do like the big quest boss, and even if it wasn't like this huge thing, like it still was kind of a landmark of, okay, if someone did this, they got to this point in the game, and you have an idea of like their overall proficiency. But with scaling, it just takes away the total component of getting something done, like actually an achievement. You don't know if they're like a total noob or if they've been around for a ton and they just put it off the quest. It doesn't really mean anything. The thing that is probably the best here, tuning is basically being removed completely since there's no more episodic gear. This is probably the best change out of the entire update. If you look at things like infusion, that should work the exact same as before. The changes that are more interesting, I think, they mentioned that free players are going to cap at 1,000. So like if you've gotten more than 1,000 combat levels and then you unsubscribe, your level goes back to 1,000. You can't like refarm the skins of the previous areas that you're at. So this makes sense. I think this is mostly clear. Weapon crafting is probably one of the more interesting sections. So you guys can see they don't have that second level on them anymore. The main takeaway on crafting is that you can now craft up to your level multiplied by 5. So if you're, say, 250 crafting, you should be able to craft all the way up to a 1250 weapon. That 1250 weapon is just directly correlated with the combat level, and then you can use that anywhere. You don't have to attune it to an obelisk or a certain episode to use it in that episode more effectively. This is also a big change from the previous update, which had a lot of different interpretations, but most people were thinking it would gradually fall off as we pushed like episode 12. But they made a pretty clear post here that said that there will be a new crafting method for episode 6 and beyond, since we know that episode 6 will likely bring 3,000 total combat level, which is higher than the 2,500. And what that means is basically that, yeah, once they launch episode 6, we're getting a plan. So we'll be looking forward to that to see if the update is good. There is some rebalancing with the pricing. I'm not really going to get into that a whole lot. There's a couple weird changes here, like the Enchantress is going to be moved to Mine of Mantuban, and they're going to rename it to the Infusionist. So doing Lost and Found will kind of all be associated with episode 3, which is like the crafting area anyway. So this kind of makes sense from that perspective. But I think that also means, unless if I'm missing something, that like free-to-play players won't be able to upgrade their tools, like to get better trowel, for example, an episode 1 tool. There's some mentioning here of the reagents. Mostly looking at this, they're looking at alchemy reagents. A lot of these were dropping in the mines. There's some leather item here. These are basically being rebalanced across all the drop tables rather than making them specific to the mines. And they're going to be refunding all episode combat capes. So that's interesting. I'll get some money back. That'll be kind of cool. Then they talk about what the new combat capes will look like. But yeah, that's kind of the idea with the main change here. There is some important information they drop here at the bottom. The combat level calculation is going to be basically averaged out. So if you have put in a bunch of time into a certain episode, they're going to probably measure, you know, all the levels between 200 and 500 at a certain difficulty rating versus levels of, say, 20 to 200, and then even 1 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 20, since those are all kind of on different curves, if you will, which is fine. I mean, that's kind of what we'd expect. I'm hoping that that's not a big problem. Did catch one thing here that's a little bit surprising. They have a weapons and armor existing gear conversion calculator. This is probably the #1 reason, unless if I'm missing something, about why you might want to get all of your combats up to level 200. It's kind of like balance out if you can, because this combat formula, unless if I'm missing something about like the way that XP is working or the actual formula that's being used on the back end, but it looks like this level conversion is going to happen at a 1-to-1. So any level is basically valuable. So you'd want to get your 200s done to get the best weapon to then hit the best difficulty curve. So if I have a level 500 weapon right now, a 500 epic especially, and I am only at level 1 in my other combat professions, then I'm going to have this 500 epic, but I'm going to have really quick levels after that. Versus if I grind out my 200 levels, I'm actually going to still get that 500 epic, but it's going to be converting at a higher level level, a higher base level for my overall combat, and I'll still be able to use it and then get more mileage with that weapon. So this is probably one of the more surprising things, at least if I'm interpreting that correctly. If you guys think I'm missing something, feel free to talk about it in the comments. But I think that this is one incentive even for myself to start pushing to see if I can get all of my 200 combats done so that we can keep, you know, our level. I think we have like a 495 uncommon warhammer, right? It's not like a huge deal, but it's also a weapon that we'd like to bring forward. Yeah, I'm not like looking forward to, you know, having to farm all these levels really quickly if this update's launching in like a week. So a little bit of a takeaway there that's not necessarily positive. They do mention that the upgrade trees are still going to be present, but yeah, that should pretty much surmise the whole thing here. The only other thing I think I jumped over is that the leaderboards are going to have a legacy component to them to check to see all of the existing leaderboards for the 4 episodic combat leaderboards as we see them today. So maybe somewhere you'll be able to find out that I was the second person to hit 500 guard, but yeah, not a big deal. So all in all, I think there are a lot of good things in this. If you were to say that this post was coming out in a game that, you know, wasn't in early access, I think this change is phenomenal. I think it's actually quite good. At a high level, because this game has been out for the time it's been out, launched into early access almost 3.5 months ago, right? It's February 15th as I make this video. This update came out on the 12th. So 3 months, 6 days after release. The weird thing is that this post is coming over a month after the previous post, which was in January, a month and 3 days to be accurate. And I think it's a bit of a 180 from what they were previously posting. So they went from, we're going to completely reset you every episode so that as new players come in, they don't have to do each episode's grind. That was kind of where it started, and I think that was their thought process. And then players came, they played, and they absolutely hated the transition of going from one episode to the next. They're like, why does my gear not work? Why does my whole inventory somehow become useless? Why do my levels not matter? Why are my hits all being reset like I'm a total noob? And that's what was happening, right? People hated it. And they came out with this first combat proposal, which was, let's take the majority of the people who are facing this as an issue, which are your beginner players who are probably between 20 and 40 combat in any, you know, maybe it's guard, maybe it's scout, whatever. And let's give those guys full transferability of their 20-ish combat levels so that they can get through each episode and then carry that combat forward, which seemed like a good solution. And then this is kind of the polar opposite side, which is actually, let's get rid of the whole idea of making you have to restart. And instead, let's just make it everything you do in every episode is going to matter a ton. And what's wild about this is kind of the opposite way that the game is set up right now, right? We can grind anywhere we want. I could go grind 500 levels in Chronopolis if I wanted to. I could literally not do any of the other ones. So competitive nature aside, this update is just a bit of a flip, right? It's taking a lot of communication that was done about the progress, like, oh, don't change what you're doing, and then going the opposite direction. From a competitive standpoint, if we do want to look at it that way, I think a lot of people are a bit surprised because this update is taking a lot of effort that people have put in 3 months of a game that said it was not going to wipe, a game that didn't wipe beta, a game that's been progressing pretty naturally, and arguably still is missing a lot of things on its roadmap, right? If we pull up the current list, as you can see on screen, we have a set of features here, and the only one that's actually in the game is leaderboards. We don't have trading, which December 9th, 4th, somewhere in there, they posted that trading was kind of next on the map after queuable actions. Those didn't arrive until early January. Queuable actions came out, and then we had a little bit of a poll on, I think it was on X, where a lot of people said, let's get the combat reworked. So they're clearly focusing on it. I don't think this this update in itself is not going to change anything for like the majority of people playing the game. We know the player base is, unfortunately, it's dropped quite a bit, right? We were seeing close to 20,000. Now we're seeing close to 500 to 1,000. This is actually even like a further 30% decline over like the previous month. This is not a huge issue for the game in the long run because we know that they're working on fixing the entire game. They are not as invested in, you know, meeting the needs of every player who's playing, you know, 15 hours a day. They're looking, of course, at like how do they build a game for 100,000 players, 1 million players, right? They want to see true success here. And yeah, we're pushing, I think, around 100,000 accounts that have been created. I know I've seen some of my ranks, some of my alts hit around that 90,000 mark. So there are people trying the game, but I don't think it's sticking, and I don't think it's not sticking because of the combat upgrade. This is where I just have to reference the video I made in early January. Like, if there are any developers watching this, I hope like this is being paid attention to, because I feel that the ideas that we presented there were comments like, I hope the devs are listening to this. Like, I think itemization is probably the biggest problem in this game. There's no sense of exploration and like the open world. Maybe that's gonna come in as we get more episodes and more geographic content, but right now the exploration component is very minimal because there's not a whole lot of like surprising things to find in the world that make the world feel alive. There's no hidden spots, there's no surprises. And the way that I explain this to my buddies, like it feels like all of the RNG is in all of the wrong places. Their entire combat formula is currently basically doing this RNG roll where you're still very likely to die in pretty much any fight you do, but your HP fills up every time. And you see this RNG of maybe the epic drops versus the common drops, right? Or even no drops or coins, whatever it might be. But all that really happens because of that is that anytime that you're not getting at least average or better RNG, you feel actually quite negative and there's nothing you're really pushing for. And then by the time you get that epic drop, it becomes worthless in 30 levels and you just feel like you've been relatively unlucky. So the game is lacking on any sort of permanence. I would say anything with collectabilities. We go back to itemization because really for a game like this, a point and click game, everyone's looking at their investment of time and what they're trying to get out of their experience, and they're trying to accomplish things. This is a game where I think people can push their levels, but right now we can't do anything with those levels. And until we can, I don't see this game having a lot of traction with people who want to play it for any bit of time outside of maybe just pushing for levels because of itself, right? So if you want to keep pushing levels, by all means, but as we saw, like this update, because they're taking out the combat levels from each episode race, what is actually happening is it looks like some of the episode races, notably episode 2, is completely getting flipped. The person who maybe was rightfully deserving of rank 1 Hope Force may be losing it depending on when this patch goes live. And we don't have any real sense. We don't know what month this is coming. I don't even know how the situation will be resolved, and I think it'll be a bit interesting. Yeah, Nat versus Ape Pathetic. Very interesting race if you guys don't know what we're talking about. Basically, Ape has a lot of scout levels that he hadn't done yet, but he was about 100 levels behind Nat, and because he only has 60 or so non-combat levels, now Nat has to do about 70 gather levels and like 30 carpentry levels, so it's gonna be super close. I have no idea. What looked like a pretty clear race is now kind of coming down to the wire. So I would like to say that the major issues that I see personally with this is one of timing, a bit of the dismissiveness of the nature of the text about, you know, there's not really a sense of like, okay, we did this type of thing incorrectly. And I get that they're trying to move fast, but the nature of the timing is not quickly, right? Like this update is a 180 that took about a month to pull off. And I think it's important that we got this as a communication, right? This could have been much worse if they launched it and then went back. So a lot of credit has to be given to them for at least fixing it before it goes live. At the same time, I don't like the way that they use, you know, we've already made significant progress implementing this new plan. We're hoping to launch it very soon. I'd like to say that they've been spending a lot of time on the combat update, and then with like the amount of support and feedback, we would hope to launch it soon, right? It's just this comes across as actually we've been working on this different thing and now we're going to tell you about it. And it might launch tomorrow, it might launch in a month, but I just don't think the communication is super solid on this one. Beyond that, I think that if people come to me and they ask me about this update, I kind of give them a bit of a cautious answer because now I don't feel that people should be putting very focused investments in the game. And obviously it's early access, right? We have to be ready for these types of pivots to happen. Competitively, I think everyone's kind of knowing what they're getting into, and it's sounding like maybe 100 or 200 people that are even looking at the game that way, so I don't want to necessarily speak just to them. But if you're looking at playing Brighter Shores, it is free to play and it's still a great game to get into to just try it out. But I think that in terms of things that we're looking for, maybe these items or raids, bosses, dungeons, maybe some unique drops that have real long-term value, I don't think even like collectibles, none of that's really going to be coming this year. I think you have to really start looking at 2026, maybe like mid next year is a realistic guess. The make or break for me is going to be once that whole checklist is done of all the things they plan to do before launch, I'm going to be reevaluating it. You know, how is trading working? Like, is there a lively economy? Is my time being valued? And does the game have a positive future? So I hope this video helps you understand the update and gives you my sense of how I feel about it. Being someone who has 500 guard and like literally less than 50 in every other combat profession, yeah, it's a bit surprising. I think that, you know, I originally would have loved if this was in the game at launch. Like I said, a lot of the issue here is one of timing, and then one of kind of the nature of the communication itself, kind of dismissing the effort that I think many people have put in. It seems like the right direction. So I think going forward, hopefully people are willing to give it a second chance, because right now We know a lot of people have kind of stepped away, and maybe they're going to try it out again at early access, but maybe not. We know that RuneScape grew very slowly, and a lot of people did kind of fall off the boat as it turned, and there were major changes even when RS2 came out. A lot of people kind of stuck around in Classic and never really touched RuneScape again. Same thing kind of happened over and over again. Games will continue to grow. So I'm curious to see kind of how this transforms, and I am excited to see it go live. I think it'll be a fun thing to test out. Long-winded video, guys, but that's going to wrap it up. Hope you had a good time enjoying this wonderful video. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to drop a sub. We are less than 100 subs away from 1,000. This is a channel that we're mostly dedicating towards any progression-based MMO. I think we're kind of bouncing between a 2004 private server called Lost City. I've been dabbling in that lately. But we're doing lots of coverage of some of this older MMO content, and now we're looking forward to see what other games might enter this genre in the future. But yeah, take it easy, guys, and have a great day. Bye.